All right. For the audience that does not know you, please feel free to introduce yourself.
My name is Olesya Shyvikova. I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. I was born in Ukraine. I grew up there, and I'm from Crimea. So for me, the war in Ukraine is not 2.5 years, it's 10 years now. I'm a journalist and a filmmaker. Before the war, I was working a lot on the women-driven films about beauty and about what does it mean to be a woman, nature, all the fun stuff. And I never imagined myself shooting on the front lines. So it rapidly changed after the war has started, and now I work a lot with Ukraine on different filmmaking, journalistic, and volunteer projects.
Yes, and we spoke a lot over the phone yesterday. It was kind of cut short, but we did get to talk over the phone. And I want to just start from the get-go with this. You told me about how you wrote an essay about this. I couldn't find it online. However, you told me about how you met with Vladimir Putin, right?
Yeah, the essay was for my entrance for to journalism program. So definitely not online. It's probably somewhere at the college, right? But I did when I was 19 years old. That was a long time ago. I'm 42, so that was 20 something years. I was a student in Crimea, and I was working in a newspaper, the reminiscence of the Soviet newspaper called Komsomolskaya Pravda of Kremu. That means the Komsomol. It's like Boy Scouts of Soviet Union, truth in Crimea. So as a journalist, it was a print newspaper. For that newspaper, I was sent on an assignment where Vladimir Putin was visiting together with Ukrainian President Kuchma at that time. So I met him, and as a young journalist, before everything, before ever we could think that something like this can unfold, I felt that there was no soul in his eyes at all. I was so unimpressed that it really showed through the article I wrote. And also, what really stood with me, he had very cold and limpy hands. So the handshake, it was a meet and greet after the event with the journalists. And he just had this limpy, cold, slimy handshake. And this is all what I remember about him. He's not that tall and looked kind of like a gray rat. That's what I remember.
Do you remember anything with the conversation, with any of the words he used at all? Nothing?
No, it was a cultural event. And it was a spiritual more than cultural. So it was very important for them to be there. And in the retrospect, when I see it now, this was they were the first moves to actually occupy Crimea, because they started in Crimea by putting lots of Russian cultural organizations, by opening Russian schools, pumping a lot of money. So you would have a normal school and then a Russian school that is overfinanced, or a house, or like a high rise, the Soviet ugly high rises, and here comes the Russian house, the Russian apartment building that is fancy, and so they started doing that to play in people's minds. So it was all strategically planned.
Well, you met Putin well before he was at the level of power he is today, right?
Yeah,
So what was his position at the time,
he
right?
was a
Because now
president. Yeah,
he was still the president
yeah,
of
he was
Ukraine,
the president of Russia, right?
Russia. I don't know why I said Ukraine. Sorry, of Russia. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So he was the president. He was not in the position, but still, Russian and Soviet, they used to sabotage country by country, regime by regime. So, in the retrospect, that event was sabotage, and it was very important because that was a church that legends say the whole Slavic region was baptized from there, because in the 7th century, a Kievan Count Vladimir went to ask for a hand of a Byzantine princess, and he was a pagan, and and she was a Christian. So, and it's a big event. This church was destroyed during the Second World War and stood there forever with no roof, like just in remnants. So Russia and Ukraine put money together to restore the church, and then Russia invested in a golden dome. And this was the event when the Golden Dome was put on the church. So yeah, this is what I remember. And you know, it was so insignificant at that time that I didn't even make an effort to remember. He was just a meh, you know, not a world leader that you will be like, I met a world leader. So
But from what you experience, he just, because again, Vladimir Putin, getting to meet with him is not something many people get to do, especially nowadays, right? It's unusual to hear for sure, and you know, getting to see him, especially, well, not only get to see him, but to get to have a conversation and speak with him for a little bit at any point, especially well before a war, not where he is now, because now he's a very secluded, very private, hyper private individual. And considering that you've seen everything firsthand, you know that he's extremely private, has very few people in his inner circle. You know, it's not like the US where it's like a very public individual. He's just very private.
he's scared also
Yeah,
because there is like how many millions of people want him dead.
a
So
lot of people.
yeah.
Yes, a lot of people want him dead. But so when you met him before all of this, was there any difference as to like what you see him as now? Like, is he the same person? Do you think, because do you see him in like interviews now as changed, and what's changed?
The impression that I got from him back then was that he's not sure of himself. And it was a weird impression for a 19-year-old girl of a, you know, head of one of the biggest countries in the world, like that he's very unsure of himself. Right? I don't know what happened now. Like it, and it doesn't. We don't really know because over the years, over the oldest 20-something years, he has been trained to put a mask. So we don't really know. We don't really know who he is. We don't know much about him. He's just, you know, functioning uh, as a machine at the moment. At that time, he was just an unsure little man with a limpy handshake.
Well, one thing, and it's interesting you're bringing up the point that he seems unsure, because one of the things that Tucker Carlson, when he did the interview with Putin, that he commented on afterwards on another interview, is that he said that Putin came in and he seemed nervous, right? He seemed like an overprepared student. Do you agree with that impression of him?
I think I do. Yes, I think I do agree very much. And we don't know all the backstage of, you know, the politics and if he's really in power anymore, if there is something or someone who that is, you know, governing Russia and he's just a muppet, as you know, it happens many times. But I would agree very much with Tucker in this one.
One thing I will also ask is, while you don't remember the contents of the conversation, was there any particular way that he made you feel? Like uncomfortable, just weirded out, or like you knew that this was fake?
No, it's just that I was really surprised. It was interesting for me to meet him for sure. You know, as a 19-year-old girl, you're meeting the president of great, mighty Russia, right? And it was really weird that he was not a big deal. That was the thing. Like, who is this unsure little man? Was that cold, limpy handshake? And I was, you know, as all 19-year-olds, very sure of myself. I didn't like, okay, uh, it was a meh, like, you know, meh. And this is weird, right? That you would at least maybe want to feel a little bit of his might, of, you know, the evil might. But there was none of that. He's just he felt like an insignificant little man.
So you're saying he felt like weak. He felt like he didn't really know where he stood. Like there really wasn't a strong support internally. Like he just felt
He
very
felt
weak.
like he was withdrawn, that he was not there. As if that was like what I wrote in that essay that I wrote in 2015 when I was applying to a journalism program. I wrote that, Mr. President, the 19-year-old me was not impressed. There was no soul in your eyes, and your handshake was limpy and cold. So, and this was it. So it was not and it's easy to make a teenager impressed. So, you know, if teenager was unimpressed, then he is not a big deal. So that's what it is. And sometimes life happens to, you know, destiny puts people in the positions. And that is why the choices that he makes in the politics, if he has been struggling from back then, of being not present, withdrawn, maybe fighting some psychological problems or addictions, or you never know, right? So by now probably it's much worse, and that is why this inhumane, tyrannic decisions that he takes in Ukraine.
So now to follow this up, have you met with the leaders of Ukraine?
I met with Kuchma, and I met with ex-leader of Ukraine, Poroshenko. I cover a security forum for it that happens in Halifax. It's the second biggest security event, and I did met with Poroshenko on quite a few occasions. I actually, and if you ask me how Poroshenko was, he was he's a normal dude, like very approachable, normal dude. He was present, he was there. He had shoes that were quite used. This was really surprised me, like they were really comfortable, well lived in shoes that didn't suit the occasion of a world security forum. At least he was present, he was real, he was a human.
So one thing I will now ask is, do you have any thoughts on Zelensky as the current president of Ukraine?
It's a tough one, because in the beginning we all thought that he didn't run, he stayed, he's a hero. But now is what is happening, is what I really know, what is happening in the military and on the front lines. I don't really think that the hero is really a hero. I think he stayed for a reason, whatever reason it is. There are lots of questions that people want to ask him in terms of the beginning of the war, because, and it's not allowed to ask, because it's it's an emergency act in Ukraine, so you're not allowed actually to protest or to ask the questions to the government until the war is over, right? But my question would be that there was a sequence of event in the beginning of the war that really didn't add up, from demining the stripe of land between Crimea and Ukraine, right? This was it actually opened a safe passage, and many, like, they knew that they're going to be attacking, they knew that. And not having bomb shelters, not being prepared when you knew that it's going to happen, it actually prompts you to ask more questions. And I work in Ukraine. I don't want to have any. My work is quite important. I don't want to have any, problems with the current authorities. But as a Ukrainian, I would like to know answers to many questions.
So now, with regards to wherever you're working in Ukraine, so from beginning to end, what's the story? So you were born in Crimea, you told me, and from there, the details, it's a long story, right?
I was
From when
born in Kharkiv, actually, to a military dad who was a Soviet military dad. So, born 1956, 17 years old, went to a Soviet military academy, brainwashed to the extent that I don't know how people could be brainwashed like that. And so he was by the time Ukraine became independent, he was a colonel, and then he became the brigade commander in Crimea. So I grew up in Crimea, but we lived in literally almost all big cities in Ukraine, because military families move. And yeah, and then I studied Arabic history, language, arts, and politics, have masters in that, went to work in Egypt. And so, your life goes on. We came to Canada because we came back to Crimea because of the Arab Spring. So my life has a lot of revolutions and upheavals. And then when in Crimea, there were indications that things are going to get hot, we applied to come to Canada, and we did. So, and that's it. And my biggest dream was to become a journalist. My military dad told me, "You journalist? No, you're going to be killed in the first dark alley because you don't keep your mouth shut and your tongue is too long." So that was the reason behind not. And then, Canada seemed to an Ukrainian immigrant like a land of dreams and opportunities. So I decided to follow that. And I became a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, until the war started.
Well, now with your work as a journalist in the war, right? You've seen firsthand a lot of this, right? A lot of what's been going on. You've experienced it, and there's been news articles written about you with regards to everything that you've had to go through. And I think I saw one article about your husband, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and just overall, what happened, like from beginning of the war to now? What's been happening? What have you seen? What haven't you seen?
Before we go into that, I just want to tell a little story because I always get asked this question. A mom of two of my own kids and a foster girl that we took from Kherson, um, a documentary filmmaker in a beautiful Nova Scotia that shot a lot of nature and women-driven documentaries. What are you doing in the dirt fields of Zaporizhia? And this is a question that I get asked so many times. It's like, why you? And I'm not, I'm what, 5'3" ish. So not your typical, military journalist. But I told you the story over the phone, and I'll repeat it. That I was watching the war for the first week as a something that is happening on TV. I've been through that drill with Crimea, and I was hoping and feeling kind of that it's going to be the same. And then the second week, I saw the house I was born into in Kharkiv, in northern Saltivka, one of the most destroyed regions of Kharkiv. It was destroyed partially, and the seventh floor where my, the apartment you lived in, like your first, like this will stay with you forever. And I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the apartment on the seventh floor was scorched black windows. This was the deal breaker for me. I couldn't breathe. I watched it over and over and over again. I'm having goosebumps as I'm talking to you. And I sent the kids to a friend. I locked myself in a room and I howled like an animal. I needed 1 hour. I never knew, like a wounded animal, I never knew that human could produce this kind of sounds, and I was done in an hour, very calm. I washed my face and I decided that it's going to be my war. I decided that that person I met when I was 19 years old is going to pay for. And it has been, it can be naive, it can be a little, unstable, but it's a crusader war at the moment for many of us. That is why we're on our own crusade. And that's my reason why I decided, regardless of being an immigrant and living in Canada for 10 years, I'm going to stand up and do something. And so I did.
So one thing we'll ask is, since much of your work revolves around the idea of, not just covering what's going on in Ukraine, but also what the other side is doing to Ukraine, what Russia is doing to Ukraine. So have you, and I've mentioned this woman many times on my show, but her name is Sarah Adams, right? And she does charity work in Ukraine, humanitarian work. She was a former CIA analyst, and she was the head of the Benghazi investigation in the United States. Are you familiar with her at all?
I've heard of her work, and we never crossed paths. No.
Okay, well, with her, she and I had a conversation on the show about how, again, this was about her work in Ukraine, partly. So, with her work in Ukraine, since it's charity work, there's really no reason why, in theory, people should be being targeted or attacked or killed. And what she explained to me that was very interesting was that there are groups of Russian sympathizers that will identify individuals who are in Ukraine, right? And the Russian government, whoever that may be, whatever agencies, they may be, they will gather that intelligence and they will go out and kill humanitarian workers, right? Or they will often kill people that are doing humanitarian work in Ukraine. Is that true? Have you seen that?
So we were working, it was the last day of our first mission in Zaporizhia, and we were shooting a film that is we still don't have an ending to that film. It was our first shot, and you gather in from we have tons of footage, but I still don't know how it ends. And it's kind of, for me, a big enigma. of how will I end the film. I still don't know. So, but anyway, so our first mission, and we offered to go to the positions. Because if you're making a film about National Guard, so they told, why don't you take the Canadian journalists and put the press, helmets and whatnot, and you go and let them just film around. It's relatively safe-ish, not safe, but it's real positions, like the ground zero. So we did. They brought us there, and we were filming around, and we went out of the armored vehicle Rochelle to film. It was 2 weeks after the battlefield, so lots of interesting footage. And the FPV came, and we were obviously, blue helmets, blue vests, press written all over us. We're press, and not press, Ukrainian press, because it was written in English. We're obviously a foreign press, right? So, and once the FPV came, they told us, get in the car. And they started making circles to make a lot of dust. So they turned 360 and left. And just maybe it takes 2 to 3 minutes to get in a log. 2.5 minutes after that, we were away. There was a guided air bomb that was thrown there, and a couple of other munitions. So they spent like at least $500,000 on us. Why? 2 journalists. And then the endless stories from that region, Orikhiv, Zaporizhia region, about humanitarian convoys being bombed, about there was a heartbreaking story. I don't know if do you want heartbreaking stories, or people are fed up of the heartbreaking stories from Ukraine?
I mean, tell me whatever you feel is necessary to tell me. So if it's whatever you feel is necessary to tell me, to get to your point and to prove your point and to tell your story, if it's necessary, then tell it.
So the town of Orikhiv was a little tiny town, not a village. It had a town council, and it had a post-secondary institution in a very beautiful suburban village kind of setting. Now there is no light, no gas, no nothing. Like it's a ghost town with a town council still functioning. So you would see bombs, guided bombs, or whatever they are throwing at the town being thrown, and then the little tractors with people will come out and start filling the holes, bringing water to the town, or bring humanitarian supplies. And the day we needed to film there, they told us, don't come. And we asked why. They told, because the water cisterns are coming. This big trucks with water that people then go with their little bins and fill the water in. I was like, why? Because they told they shelled it 3 times. People died standing in that row, filling up the water. So they told us, not today. And it was a matter of fact. They just were conveying us some information, right? And the other apologies, heartbreaking story was one of the soldiers in the unit we work with. I call them my boys. They call me mom. You develop in the front line. You develop very strange friendships that are very, very strong, because things are so real there that you become friends after a day or 2. So, anyways, my boys. One of them, he is a man in his late 40s, early 50s. His name is Ruslan. Ruslan joined. He's an agricultural worker. Lived in that town of Orikhiv all his life. He joined the National Guard one day after his boy, a 21-year-old, came back from captivity, Azov battalion. When his son was back, he joined the National Guard. That day, when the boy came back, he had to tell him that his girlfriend that he was going to marry, the captive boy, was pregnant when she was killed. The girl was delivering in a van, volunteers, it was written there, delivering money, pension money, to the elderly that cannot move out of the combat zone. So they would have this van, and it's written volunteer van, and they just shelled it. And it's just one story. And when you look into the eyes of this man, and his son is fighting again, now he's fighting probably looking for death. That's what he told me, because his future fiancée and his unborn baby were killed. Now he's just looking for revenge. no matter if he lives or dies, right? It's very sad. But when you look at the eyes of this man, he smiles, he's there, but he, I don't think I've seen sorrow as deep as I've seen in the eyes of people there. I've never in my life seen this sorrow.
So, with all this going on and the severe targeting of individuals helping Ukraine, anybody even remotely involved in Ukraine is targeted, right? Anybody who's a journalist, a volunteer, a humanitarian, whatever, is being targeted by the Russians. The question now is, what's the motivation of Putin exactly, right? And all of this, what motivates someone like him, right, to do everything? Is it just more power? Is he, just getting older? And because there's also that where he is old, and so he will never really see the future of the world. So, that's also an argument. But is it, what does he really want here? Like, what's his end game exactly?
You mean with Ukraine or with targeting separate individuals who are
Well,
speaking?
more just generally, what's Putin's end goal in all of this?
For me, as a Ukrainian, I think that he just cannot take that we didn't fall. And and this answers your question of why they're targeting volunteers and press and everything. Weak people, cowards, they cannot take someone who's strong and brave. It's they will go an extra mile just because someone stood up to them. And it's very funny, the stories from the battles and the stories of the Russian captive Russians, what they say to our guys, it's ridiculous. It's like, oh, you're actually like us. It's like, what did you expect me to have 7 legs? Like, this level of, what do you mean? Actually, yes, we eat and and love and poop and pee and eat and everything in between. Yes, we have 2 legs and 2 eyes. And this kind of, the ignorance, the brainwashing, and fear of someone who can stand up and tell, no, this ends here. This is my explanation. I like it. I live with it.
So now I will ask if you think that, what's the solution here for actually? Well, what's the solution for Zelensky to do? Like, what's the move that he's supposed to make? Because if you get, the United States, which is giving tremendous funding to Ukraine, and I mean, it's not our war, right? But they are still giving a lot of money to Ukraine, right? They're giving a lot of money to them in order to fight Russia, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that's where I think a lot of it comes from. But with Zelensky, though, he's kind of stuck in the middle of all this, right? He's a comedian who became president, and next thing you know, he's caught in this standstill between Russia, who without the support of the United States, I'm sorry, Ukraine would have basically been destroyed without the support of the United States. And Zelensky, if he kind of goes, if he does anything against the United States, he's screwed, because then his major supporters are gone, or almost all of his support is gone, and that's a lot of money and resources, and then Russia would destroy the country. So, and they already have most of the country. So, what for someone like him, with everything that he's going through, and the fact that he's basically sheltered in one place, or the United States, what is he supposed to do? Right? Like, what would you recommend to him? What would you say is the best move for him to do?
Take care of the corruption in Ukraine. Because as a post-Soviet country, that was a poor country, and it's a known fact, and as a Ukrainian, I own it. The country has quite a level of corruption, less than Russia. And I'm really objective there. Like Russia, they can sell you their mom for a bottle of vodka. So don't get me started. But it's, again, you have to change from inside, because with the level of corruption it is, because when there is a disorder and mess in the country, it's so easy for corruption to flourish, right? So our guys on the front lines that put their lives on the line and lost so many friends and lost limbs and hands and saw the unseeable, they are actually talking about that next stop will be Maidan, where all the revolutions happened in Ukraine, the central square, the Independence Square, because of the corruption. Because we cannot enter European society, Western society, if we are not gonna correct it from the head to the toe. And I think that if this ends, or if there's going to be kind of a strict punishment for corruption during the war, things will change.
In your
Because I don't
time,
know. Yeah, I don't know what he's supposed to do on the international arena, because we had so many talks with so many, big and small journalists and politicians and whatnot. It's a situation of the aggressor that doesn't have mercy. It's a madman situation, so it's unpredictable. You don't know what you're supposed to do. You can only fix something that is around you in your power, right?
well, in your time as being a journalist in Ukraine, I'm sure you've met a lot of other journalists in Ukraine, right? They're doing the exact same thing as you, or generally the same thing as you. Sometimes they're correspondents for major media groups. But in your time meeting all these different individuals that are journalists, independent, work for other agencies, whatever, what did you notice about all of them, right? About all the individuals that you've met in Ukraine? Is there anything is there any one thing that you've noticed
All the
between all of them?
question. Because I was just talking yesterday with someone about that. That you need to have a certain level of madness to be able to do what we do. Because at some point, especially when you're in the circumstances like the war, at some point the desire to tell the story and the desire for the world to listen and for the world to see overpowers your instinct of self-preservation. And I know it. I try to balance it. I recognize that in me, that okay, let's go do it. Maybe not. Let's still go do it, and we'll do it safely. And then my crew is like, there is no way to do it safely. Trust me, this is wrong, because it's not in my. And they do trust me, and I beat myself up so many times about that. But you need to be certain. You need to have a certain level of madness in you to put your life on the line for the world to see what is really happening. And wait, like I am sure many of my colleagues will agree with me. Last year I went for a special course in Washington D.C. called Heat Environment and Hostile Environment Training for journalists and NGOs. Oh yeah, everyone has this in them, in a good way. It's a good way, but it's why are our men standing up and fighting? And there are so many men that really stood up and put their lives knowingly for something that is right. A friend of mine is a very close friend. He's an American, he's a Canadian and British. He told me once something, and he worked in Ukraine for 7 months on the kitchen, serving the displaced people. I was telling to him, Stephen, I am trying to fundraise for the such and so, and it's so difficult, and it's such an important thing that we need to fundraise for, and I feel I'm losing hope. And he told me, as long as you stand up for what is right and what is light, the hope will always be there. And I guess that's the thing, to believe that you're standing up for what is right and what is light, that many journalists do and volunteers.
Well, what I will ask now is about the government of the United States and its relation to Ukraine. So I have kind of gone back and forth with this, and a lot of people think that are very in between with whether or not it's a good thing that the United States is supporting the war and funding Ukraine, and other people think it's not. And and it's gone to a point where the United States now funds basically almost every aspect of Ukraine, right? Like we fund the government pensions, we fund many government salaries. So uh do you think that the United States should be funding any aspect of the war in Ukraine?
I do. And I will tell you why. Although we just talked about corruption, but all governments are corrupt. In a different way, there is nepotism, there is favorism if it's not a direct, money in hand kind of situation. So, anyways, there is not. We live in a world that is not perfect. But what we also do as humans, and with the latest development in the past 50 years with technology and internet and whatnot, we understand that we're one human family. It's not United States or Russia or Ukraine, or it's just humans, and they stand up for what is humane, for what the common values. And it's really, it might sound a little naive from a journalist, but when you see what I saw in Ukraine, you understand that if you don't stand up, your kids will have to. And as a parent, this is your biggest obligation, is to, so that they don't have to. You stand up, you find bravery. And we're very grateful to the states. All the guys on the front lines are ever grateful to the states and to all the countries that help, because you're standing up for what is right. Because we need to live a world that doesn't have a war in the 21st century. One of the characters in my film is a little girl. She is 7 years old. She lost her limb at the age of 6 because of shelling, and she was a gymnast, and by the age of 6, quite a little talented gymnast. And she got her prosthetics, and now she's competing on international level. 7-year-old training with one leg and a prosthetic leg every day. So for this little girl, and it should not be like this. We should not have wars in the 21st century. And that is why I think that it's a right thing to do, to help us, because we're a tiny little country compared to many other. Yes, we're the second largest country in Europe. We're the breadbasket. We're brave. Oh, badass. Yes. But we're small compared to many other places, right? And standing up to the one of the largest, strongest armies in the world, we need support of the world that shares the same values.
Do you think that Russians, right, that the Russian government has targeted you in any other way that because you gave me the instance where they were going to bomb you, basically, right? And then the Ukrainian, I think, was it the Ukrainian government? The Ukrainian government then tells you, you said the FPV.
Yeah, FPV is the drone, FPV drones. So
Right.
no, it was not targeted to me as Olesya. It was just targeted to a little human with a press sign. That is a war crime. Bingo. I don't think I am to my work. I work in 19 little villages on the outskirts of Zaporizhia, where it's either dirty and mucky or dusty and dry. So I don't think there is any significance to what I do, to the Russian government. It's not. It's just the whole idea of the press. And you should know, like, this is against the international laws. So, no, and I don't really care at the moment. It is what it is. Once once you start doing, you just do. There are so many other Ukrainians, that are right there, out there, putting themselves in danger internationally, like Alexandra Matvichuk. She is the head of the center who actually filed to Hague was all the evidence of the war crimes. I interviewed them on a couple of occasions, and that is another conversation. Like, it's heartbreaking. It's just the level of inhumanity. An animal will not do this to an animal. So these are real fighters. I'm just an extra set of hands there.
Well, what would you recommend to the civilians on both sides, Russia and Ukraine?
It's a tough one, because for all my life I had one aim. I taught myself not to hate anyone. I lived as a pacifist, just one of these people that I don't function from hate. I hate no one. And then when you experience this hate for the first time in your early 40s, that is a very strange thing. And you ask yourself, is it possible not to hate them? And then when you see what they do, and when you hear all the interviews, with Russians that, yeah, let's bomb Ukrainian children, or how many children, thousands and thousands of children were taken from Ukraine, and we don't know what happened to them, right? Orphans, and not a friend of mine runs an orphanage in Kherson, and his story, like I can tell you stories by stories that are more heartbreaking than any film you will ever see, right? So the 17 kids, it was a little like the family type orphanage, were just taken. They came one time, they took the kids, no one knows where they are, and this man will have to live till the end of his life just doubt thinking if they're alive or not. So it's not possible not to hate. It's not. It becomes, oh, but it's not, I kind of made peace with it, because I understood that it's not really hate. It's a holy rage. And that holy rage, it's present in so many cultures and religions, and through mythology to the time immemorial, when something is wrong, and there is an evil that whatever a proverbial hero fights, and then he or she feels that it's a holy rage. So I don't know what to advise Russians. I don't know how will they live with that shame for generations to come. But for Ukrainians, we know what we're fighting for. The truth is on our side. All the souls of people that died in the past 2 years are on our side. And it's not that we're seeking revenge, we're seeking justice. Whatever face and look justice wants to take.
What do you think that the American public needs to be aware of, considering that you've seen this all firsthand? Because most Americans are seeing this through the eyes of Instagram, social media, the eyes of the media itself, Fox, CNN, whatever. You've seen it firsthand, and you've been through it all firsthand down to meeting Putin. So what do you think that the American public needs to be aware of that might not?
Russian propaganda. Oh, in the beginning, I was so caught up in that, fight that took a lot of my, capacity, because there will be people reaching out to me once I became a little more vocal in what is happening, and telling it, oh, a liar. You fake your footage, you fake your stories, and I was like, how can you not understand? I am talking to you. It's really what is happening. No, it's not true. It's not true. It's all staged. Like what? A house, like a high rise we got into a situation where 700 meters from us, a high rise was taken down by a guided air bomb. So, and I really experienced it firsthand. And the woman died, but thankfully only one woman. But propaganda. It's just, many people are starting to doubt, and we are disappearing from the news. And this is really, don't forget us. We will not be able to fight that fight without you. And then later on, if the evil is still there, then your kids will need to fight it, because it will come back. It always comes back. Unless we as a society, as a human society, do something. That's my two takes on it. Don't forget us. And Russian propaganda is alive and very strong.
Who's behind the propaganda?
Oh, they have the whole machine. I think back to my Soviet Union childhood. I was the last generation of so born in 1981. So I would be 10 years old when Ukraine gained first the Soviet Union broke, right? So, and I remember how brainwashed we were and how that propaganda worked. So I will tell you a very personal story. Like I shared it with quite a few friends, but not widely. It was public. My dad is a retired brigade commander they stayed in Crimea. Why? Because dad thought that Mother Russia is a great thing, and that Mother Russia means well, that Russian soldier is the most dignified warrior in the world. He, from the age 17, he was in the military, right? So when the war started, and part of his family is from Dnipro, so they're hardworking farmers that that work on the land and so on. So when the war started, the family was really separated. And his brothers would send him news about, oh, they did this, Bucha, Irpin, no, bull crap, no, 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 it's a special military operation. And then when they bombed the theater, Mariupol, where there was the children, so his older brother sends that clip to him by email and calls him and tells, open your email if you're not a pussy. Sorry, this is exactly, I'm quoting my uncle, and open that email. My dad sits on the computer, opens that email, he watches twice. He stands up, collapses, stroke. He collapses. He's recovering. He's able to use his legs and hands and everything, with some capacity. He's awfully silent about everything else. And when you ask him what really happened during this, 3 minutes of watching that clip, he just says that I lived my life in vain. That's all. So I guess all his, like, it was like it broke him open, almost killed him. And this is your Russian propaganda for you, because this, very talented military man who was in a very high position in the army was brainwashed to the extent that he couldn't see and understand what is really happening until he had a stroke. So that's a little bit of a propaganda story for you.
What's going forward now, and as opposed to looking to what has happened, because we've seen what happened, you've seen what has happened, down to your childhood home being partially destroyed. So now, where do we go from here? And looking towards the future, how does it all end? That's the key question: is how does the war in Ukraine end? Because it really comes down to the decisions of three people: Putin, Zelensky, and Biden, or whoever gets elected next as U.S. president, if it continues on there, which it most likely will, unfortunately. So where's the future in this? What's the end? What do you see the solution on all sides being?
It has a different levels for me. My boys, Хлопці, that's boys for in Ukrainian, they say we meet on Crimean Bridge. That means, we liberate all the Ukraine, including Crimea. And, as much as it warms my heart as Crimean, but when you know all those heroes personally, you start asking, and it's a dilemma for me. Does it really deserve your life? I might sound like not a patriotic person or not a believer, but when you know all these brave humans, you start asking, like, every single inch of that land will be soaked in blood and sorrow and tears. Does it really deserve it? That's my question. But when you talk to them and say this, they say, you don't understand that if we don't get our territories, at least to 2014, let's forget Crimea, they will come back again. They will restructure, recoup their powers, and come back again. So it will be just a frozen conflict. So the solution really for Ukrainians to start sending their kids to schools without being afraid of, there is no bomb shelters in the school, is to really move it back to the borders of 2014. Is it possible? I guess someone needs to die for this to happen. The proverbial evil needs to go. Because at the moment, the only way really possible for that conflict is to be frozen. I don't see them leaving all the territories behind and obliging with whatever international authorities want them to do. And it's very unfortunate and sad. So it will be just a frozen conflict that we'll have to fight yet one more time, as it happened with Donbass and Crimea. So there is no universal solution. We just, I guess, as we did for the past 2.5 years, we pray. That's the only thing, and trust that in the end, God and light always wins. I know I sound dramatic, but hey, this comes to universal truth, right? So that's it.
So with now I mentioned a little bit about this, but you being targeted, and have you been targeted digitally in any manner? Do you think that Russia has done anything to you online, over the internet,
Block
over?
or some crazy people. I just block. And
Well,
I,
what
I
what have you seen though? What have you gotten from these crazy people?
no, I don't even know if the people or bots. Now it's just so intense. So, that I'm a liar. That that they are coming for me. I don't know who they are. But thanks God, they are very late. I guess they are taking the the slow train, and I just block them again. I am not on the forefront of any huge movement. I'm just another pair of a lens with hands, and I just volunteer and do what I do. And there's so many of us there. So I am not, frankly speaking, not concerned because there are much more interesting people for them to target than just me. I'm teaching teenagers on the front lines how to make a documentary. So like not a right. That's one of the
So,
projects I mentioned to you. So my baby.
so one thing I will ask then about your documentaries is what's your favorite part about what you do in terms of making these movies, talking to these people? What keeps you going every time you do it?
Even before the war, I noticed, but with the war, it was so prominent that storytelling is a very strong weapon. It's one of those actually, can be much stronger than many other weapons. And letting someone to tell their story is very cathartic. It's almost like, you're letting this person to get everything out and turn the page. And they see it over and over again, interviewing war crime victims, interviewing kids that lost their parents, and, military people that lost their loved ones, friends. You see that in the end of that interview, there is this glimpse of light and a smile. This is my most favorite part. And a hug. It always ends with a hug. And you understand, and the person does this. I guess I do. I do all this just for hugs. No, nothing, my biggest aim is to get that final hug in the end. Um, that's it. And also there is I asked a question to a guy who lost his leg. He's 24, and he has been a fighter at Donetsk. Lost his leg, came back when the war started. He has Dan, a prosthetic leg, and he's fighting. And I told him, Dan, why are you still doing that? His answer was, who if not us? And this has stayed with me forever. Yeah, if not us, who? Each of you, each of us, fighting and standing up for whatever is true, whatever you feel dear, right? If not us, then all the world will just end.
Now, I'm going to ask two final questions, right? Number one, what advice would you give to young people?
Where? in the Western world or Ukraine or Japan?
Just the world, just the entire world. What advice would you give to young people in general?
To always stand up for what is right and what is light. That advice of a friend of mine really stuck with me, and it's a very old advice, from the times of ancient warriors and knights and everything. But it is just that, stand up, because no one else will unless you do. And it can be your little bully in the school, it can be some political situation, it can be war, it can be defending someone or standing up for your own identity. Stand up, because if you don't, no one else will. Stand up and fight. Ukrainian way.
And my last question is, if you had the chance, would you do it all again?
Yeah, I'm going in 2 weeks, 3 to 3 weeks. So, and I have quite a few trips planned. We're going to Kharkiv. We're going to Zaporizhia twice in summer. So it's not that I will do it again. I am, until the war is over, and then we'll have another fight to fight, rebuilding. That is another can of worms, right? So for sure, you cannot. It's a disease. It's all the journalists that work in all this, hot spots and NGOs. Once you go there, you want to come back. And I don't know what it is. in those places, everything feels much more authentic and real. The hugs, the eyes, the jokes, the food, and you really want to feel it again. I guess it's a psychological disorder at this point. But yeah, it's just, I wish we could, as humans, could really live like that, really treasuring every smile and every hug and every meal that we take with friends, right? But for sure, yes, again and again, as much as it's needed.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. We'll talk a little bit after the show. But do you have any final words to the audience before I cut the recording?
Please don't forget us. We need you. We're not Ukrainians or Americans or Canadians or French or anything. We're just people. And we found ourselves in this situation. We didn't choose to be in this situation. We didn't choose to fight this fight. But without you, it will all be over.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording now. All right. We'll talk a little bit after the show. All right. 3, 2, 1.